Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. I am your host, Dane Waters. I don't know if you heard my monologue, so we're just going to skip and go straight to our guest. So our first guest today is, I'm going to try and say his last name, Marco Reategui. Is that right?
Very good. It's Reategui.
Oh my God. You know what? We Americans don't do the aria, whatever that rolling our R's are supposedly. So, but I will also say you're my first Peruvian guest. So, you're the first of many, Marco. And by the way, if the audience hasn't noticed, he looks like Barack Obama. So if you have your sound turned off, I'm going to say, hey, I have Barack Obama on my show today. There you go. So let's
Peruvian,
get.
Peruvian American, I might add. Born in Peru, but lived in Chicago for 20 odd years, 24 years.
Well, you're like Barack Obama. Lived in
Exactly.
Chicago. I mean, does that mean that, but you were born in Peru, but you can't be in America. You can't be president then, can you?
No, because I was not born in the US, according to the
Okay.
current constitution. God
Well, the
knows whether it's
current,
going to change or not.
that's very true. That's another conversation to have here. Um, okay, so let's get started. Today we're talking about China. China, let me just do a little background here for those who missed the monologue. I just spent the last month in Asia. A lot of it has to do, almost all of it has to do with China, what's happening with China. China is the global player in just about every scenario these days, whether it comes to military, economic, supporting Russia, Taiwan. I mean, China is, I would say, the global player in just about every arena these days. But one thing I don't know, and I'm from Alabama, is I don't fully understand this whole discussion about the economics of what's going on, the tariffs, how China can survive. So Marco today is going to edify us on all of these important economic issues. So, Marco, thank you for being here. So let's get into this about China. By the way, talk to us about China's economy. How are they dealing with these tariffs, and what do you think of their long-term strategy is?
Well, I think, so, first of all, thank you for having me on the program. It's an honor to be invited to be part of this audience. Um, And it's a very topical one because, very much like the US, China reaches out to the world. As you said, it's a large economy, um, and over the last 30 years, I would say they have grown steadily and quietly in many ways to have a global outreach on many different levels. So they went from being the chip manufacturing of the world to being a leading power on many sectors, on many industries. They went from being a very polluting um, country in their major cities to being a relatively clean air society in their larger cities. So there is a lot to be learned from what they've done. Um, Early May holiday is a big holiday in China. And it's a 5-day holiday for what I understand. And it's kind of the barometer for how the economic sector, how the traveling sector is taking place in the country, and primarily that is what indicates whether people are spending domestically, how much they're traveling domestically, whether they're traveling by air, by train, by car, whether they're going to the malls, whether they're shopping, whether they're not. And what we've been able to see from the reports coming out and the news reels is that May holiday has proven to be a little bit slower than usual, which it sends the message to the market that things are slowing down, and things have been slowing down in China for quite some time. You have seen over the last 4 years the issues that they've been having with the real estate market, where construction has slowed down quite a bit. Having said that, not enough to really create an environment of inflationary levels that are concerning, or even recession. You know,
Let me ask you a question. So, so yeah, well, I've known about that they've had an economic downturn for a while because of their real estate. But this is what brings up the question is, given their economic downturn, let me back up and say this. I had a friend the other day who said, "Oh, well, China's going to cave to America because their economy is so bad that they have no choice but to cave." Uh, do you think, let me just ask this question. Do you think that China has the power, the economic power to withstand what's going on with this trade war with the United States because of their poor economy?
I think this is a very, very good question. And in a way, it's not so much of a economics question. It's more of a philosophical question. And why did I say that? Because most economies, most countries will focus their economic drive, their economic strategy based on the term of their current government, meaning short term, 5 years the most, maybe 10 if the incumbent president is reelected. And with the exception of very few countries where the democratic leaders find a way to stay in power for more than 10 years, right? However, China sees their economic activity and their economic strategy on a long-term basis, which brings the question of whether are they going to be able to withstand this fight. On one hand, you can say no, because the middle class is going to dictate change a lot sooner. But on the other hand, you can say yes, because they have the patience, they have the understanding, they have the knowledge that the US government will have to make a change sooner than 5 years.
Well, that's an interesting point because for our viewers, you're right. In America, I mean, Donald Trump may try and stay forever. Who knows? But in theory, and just like in Nigeria, where this broadcasts a lot primarily, is that when you have a new president in, like Tinubu in Nigeria, he's thinking about,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I have 5 years, 4 years in office. This is my economic policy. I needed to impact the economy within 4 years. And it changes. If there's a new election, when there's a new election, there'll be a new president. And the same in the
Right.
United States, same in France and the UK. But China, for example, as you're saying, they look at things in 50 to 100-year blocks because they don't have to worry because there's a consistency. There's only one political party, it's the Communist Party, right? So the
Exactly.
economic policy is set by the Communist Party and it stays there forever. So they don't have to look at these downturns, ups and downs, and based upon U-turns about whether tariffs this administration or next. Is that right?
Exactly. Well, and the other thing that you need to think about that historically, China has looked at their position in the world as a long journey. How do they view themselves as a global power? And they are a global power, right? They view themselves as a driving force on the global economy, and they are in many parts of the world. They are a strategic partner, not just by the economic input that they are putting in those countries, but the long-term strategic view that they have in the country or in the region. So they, as you said, because the government is driven by the strategic view of the party, everybody that comes after President Xi, is going to have the same view, whether the policy, the interim policy might vary just to respond to the specific and economic event of that time. The long-term view doesn't change.
Yeah, and that's important to
And
know. That's why they can withstand, right? They can
yeah,
withstand a trade war, right?
exactly. And that's the issue that we have in many countries, especially in the US, right? Right now, for example, we have a um, um, a Congress that is divided, and every 2 years you have interim elections, which shuffles the dynamic of Congress. And then every 4 years, you have elections, which shuffles the dynamic, and the new government comes in with the new agenda, but no one really, if you think about it, no one really looks back and says, okay, we're going to keep this policy on a long-term view because it does make sense for the long-term benefit of the country. And that is a shift that has taken place, I believe, over the last 30 to 40 years, where governments come in to think about more about the strategic view of the party, not necessarily the strategic view of the country.
Well, sadly, we only have a couple more minutes here because of some technical difficulties, which I apologize, Marco, for when we first started. So let's talk real quick about when you and I were chatting the other day, you were talking about how basically China may have to, I call it dump products and cheaper. So let's talk about the benefit of what the U.S. trade war, U.S.-China trade war on Africa. What is the benefit there or the possibilities there?
Well, just quickly, I want to mention about the dumping. So we're starting to see that there is a report over the weekend that garment manufacturers in India are growing concern because there's a component the garment manufacturers use in the manufacturing of garments in India for the Indian domestic product, where now the ingredient comes from China 15 to 20 basis point cheaper than the one in India. And that's now creating a problem for the Indian manufacturers. So that is an example of what you're going to see going on around the world, where China is going to find markets where they can offload raw material into areas where they have direct access, Africa, Latin America, not so much in the Middle East, but, Russia, for example, is those are areas where we can put product in order to relieve pressure.
So as far as Africa is concerned, there are opportunities for the consumers because of what the trade war and real quick because we're going to have to break here in a second here. Do you think long term who's going to be the winner in this trade war between China and the United States, and how would you define that winning?
I think they're not going to be winners. Well, let me rephrase that. I don't think that there is going to be a direct correlation of winning and losers between the U.S. and America. I think that what you're going to see is a reshuffling of the world trade activity. I think that what you're going to see is a reshuffling of how trade and commerce is conducted between countries, between regions. You're going to see, for example, in Africa, to bring it to Africa, the ACFTA, which is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, is going to, I believe, is going to become stronger because they're going to have to look at their 55 members and create a stronger free trade zone in order to drive growth and negotiate as a group, not as an individual country. So you will see agreements, hopefully you will see agreements like that institution with the European market, for example. You will see agreements where China can negotiate with that institution for the favor of 55 countries, and for those 55 countries to have access to China. Lesotho is a very good example. They just got hit with 50% tariffs on garments. They're beautiful garments. So now they are going to have to start looking at different markets, but it's a lot more powerful to do it as part of ACFTA than as a single country.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. I think one thing we're going to see is, and as I talked to some of my European friends yesterday, is that I think the world has got to stop depending on America, either as a market, as a military force, as everything, and
Absolutely.
start. And I think this, you're all right. There's going to be a reshuffling of the world, and I think it's going to be
Yep.
my thought is it's going to be to the detriment of America because we are going to lose that position in the world stage economically, militarily, everything associated with it. So, well, Marco, I really apologize about the difficulties we had early on. We have more to talk about, and I will have you back on the show if you would like to be back on the show,
Would love to.
uh, and we can talk about um, more later. Anyway, have a great day, President Obama.
You too. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. I'll
Have
talk
a
to you
great day
later.
to everyone in Africa.
Okay.